Hi everyone, this is Achyuta Bava from Nightlight Astrology, and I'm doing a live cast today to talk about Mars's square to Pluto and upcoming square to Saturn. I thought it would be fun to go live today because I haven't done so in a little bit, and I've had a lot of questions come in about these transits through email and social media. A lot of good stories too from all of you. So I thought, why not just launch into a little live cast? I will take questions if you have them today, and also try to address this transit. Now, the transit we're going to start with is Mars in Aries, making the square to Pluto in Capricorn. Let's see here. So I'm pulling up my chart so I can make sure I've got this. So the square actually perfected between yesterday and this morning, at least where I'm at, East Coast, United States. It's still within minutes of perfect, right? You've got Mars at about 2313 as I'm looking at it now. Pluto's at about 2304 Capricorn. So the square is nearly perfect at the moment. This transit has been approaching for, you could say, a week plus, and it will separate or fade for about a week plus. One thing that's really interesting to note is that it's later in the tradition that astrologers start developing what are sometimes known as orbs, which are like parameters of degrees that are used to measure aspects in astrology between planets. Ancient astrologers didn't really have the concept of orbs. They paid close attention to applications when two planets were going to come together to perfect an aspect. And then in particular, they paid attention to a 3-degree range. And sometimes that range is translated into English as an engagement. And then as the planet is within 3 degrees perfecting the aspect, it's in an engagement, which is essentially saying that the promised events, the more acute promised events, or you could say the energy the events are going to happen or the energy is going to peak. From there, as the planet separates within 3 degrees, it's as though the fruit is falling off the tree. So that whole process of engagement within 3 and separating within 3 is something to watch for. Again, you take that back about a week for Mars, a little bit more, and then if we pull this out a little bit and draw this out a little bit and see where is Mars heading relative to Pluto, you get to that 3-degree range of separation. Maybe been about a week from now, a little over a week from now. And what's interesting is that right as you get the separation from Pluto, you get the perfection of Mars to Saturn. So in other words, right as Mars is perfecting its square to Pluto, it's entering into the 3-degree engagement with Saturn, right? So it's quite a process. If you take it forward from there and get Mars to separate from Saturn within about 3 degrees, well, then you're into September. And by that time, Mars will station. So it stations at the end of its 3-degree separation from Saturn by about the 10th, and then it'll turn retrograde between the 10th and the 11th of September. And then boom, it's going to retrograde back through its engagement and square Saturn, and then back into its engagement with Pluto and square Pluto. Gets into it with Jupiter again. So this is just such a dynamic, it's like just such a dynamic series of transits that is really going to be with us for the rest of the year, because if you draw this out even more, okay, we're going into October, and it's by, like October 8th or 9th that the square from Mars to Pluto is back in town. And then go down from there, the square to Mars and Jupiter by, mid-October. Keep going, and Mars will separate from Jupiter, right? And then gets into about like mid-Aries, something like that. It stations by the middle of November and then turns direct again. And then one more time, we'll go over the squares. So then it gets back into the square with Pluto, and that comes through. Let's see, the engagement begins by about the middle of December, and it's perfecting its square to Pluto on December 21st, which is the same day of the winter solstice and the day that Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in Aquarius, they'll both have switched signs. And then it's not long after that, you got to go into the new year a little bit. But as soon as Mars finally leaves Aries, Mars goes into Taurus and then immediately makes a square to Saturn and Jupiter, and conjoins Uranus. So, like, the Mars journey of, say, all the way into mid to late January is just, it's really, really intense. There's so much Mars energy between now and, the first part of the new year. So I've been trying to kind of come back around and visit these themes over and over again. But let's start with Mars Pluto. And if you have questions, by the way, I'll be taking some Q&A afterwards. So feel free to start filling the chat box with any questions you have about anything, anything astrology related. But Mars's square to Pluto, first of all, is going to involve the themes of an explosion of, that kind of testosterone-filled, masculine, yang, dynamic, active, assertive energy. Not surprisingly, we saw this massive explosion in Beirut, in the capital of Lebanon, if I'm remembering correctly. And that explosion, I think it came last week at some point, but it perfectly coincides with the archetypal combination of Mars and Pluto, which is explosive, violent, sudden, potentially catastrophic releases of force. And that's a dynamic force that, when we apply that psychologically to our own lives, can mean that we are having extraordinary breakthroughs. I can't tell you how many of my clients, and maybe some of you have heard me say this before recently, can't tell you how many of my clients are experiencing physical health breakthroughs, whether it's, like a COVID regiment or whatever, some kind of physical activity, or a health or diet or exercise. Like, a lot of that is going on right now. That's just a really simple example. But otherwise, it can also be about the confrontation with darker elements of the psyche, the soul or psychology, explorations of will, anger, violence, aggression, assertiveness. It can also be a very demanding energy. I don't know if you've ever, if you've ever worked customer service, if any of you have, and I was thinking of a few different customer service like roles, and there's always a customer service element of, I guess, seeing people and talking about charts, right? But sometimes you get someone, if you're in any kind of customer, I was thinking about when I waited tables when I was in grad school, and I waited tables for a while, and sometimes people would come in and almost just totally dehumanize you in the way that they expected you to do certain things. Of course, I know it's my job to get you a refill or something like that. But sometimes the way that people would talk to you, or the expectant attitude that someone would take, it kind of felt like, being stripped of your dignity on some level. And the temptation that I remember facing, the feeling, the boil, kind of makes your blood boil, and you just go like, I'm a person. Like, I might be serving you in this role right now, but I'm a person. And I remember times where I just thought, man, I'd like to just dump this water over this person's head or something like that. You know what I mean? That feeling of the demand, power differentials, power struggles, demands and expectations, the way that we might be forced to do something by virtue of a position of some kind of subservient position that we hold relative to somebody else in a moment, or in a day, or at the job, or whatever. But that feeling of being squashed, or someone having their thumb on you, and that taskmaster, that ruthlessness of Mars Pluto, and the need to fight back or stand up for oneself without destroying or harming someone else in the process. It's a tricky question. It's like, I've noticed so many times in readings that I've done with people with Mars Pluto transits in their chart when they were born, right? So they have a natal Mars Pluto square or something like that. opposition, conjunction even, that sometimes there's going to be these wild overcompensations. You get pushed around, you feel afraid, anxious, you become overly passive, maybe overly subservient, not like a good servant, but like subservient in a not so great way to others. And then one day, you know, one day you just haul off and deck someone, some, or it blows up in some kind of craziness, and it's like, well, yeah, it was pent up for too long. So where things have been neglected or avoided, or where the thumb of power and oppression has been pushing something down, holding down, persecuting for too long, there can be these violent, wild swingbacks uh, in the opposite direction. Some of that is natural. It's like physics. You know what I mean? It's just like enough pressure, and eventually it blows. So it's just like it's like an energetic thing, and it's really not about anyone's fault. On the other hand, if you experience yourself being sort of, you know, stepping up in some way or asserting yourself in some way, but maybe you get destructive in the process, I think it's a really good moment to recognize that we can be two things at once. In other words, we can be in, for example, if you have a blow up of some kind and it was justified, it was just the last straw. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. You needed to stand up for yourself. Now that can be like that could be a valid experience. At the same time, we can say, and I went a little bit too far. Maybe I went too far because I don't quite know how to wield my assertiveness. I don't. I'm not really good at it, so I made some mistakes. We can be both. You know, we can do both, right? We can be like, I had a right to get upset. I didn't have a right to get upset in the way that I did. You know, I try to help my daughters differentiate between these things all the time, because I just feel that, like, you can see it in kids really easily. It's like, no, you were right to be upset with your sister. She took your doll. You smashed a folding chair across her face. You know what I mean? Not cool, So, but you had a right to be upset. You know what I mean? So that's something to explore right now with Mars Pluto. Um, it's a little bit more of a pressure cooker than normal because Saturn's in the mix too, and Saturn brings in that extra element of constraint or restraint or pressure. So the pressure to respond in the most mature, serious, focused way, great, that's awesome. I mean, we could all use that, like, becoming a little bit more of a peaceful warrior or a martial artist, where we know how to manage that martial energy. We use it in self-defense. We don't use it to harm people, however you want to put it. That Saturn and Pluto can help us to shape and hold very powerful forces within ourselves. On the other hand, it's sometimes, this is just me. I personally, although I consider myself very progressive, I also really can't stand political correctness policing. One of the reasons is because I feel like there's this way in which, if we don't allow ourselves to just be human and learn as we go, and people are really scared to get it wrong, like being scared to get things wrong or being scared to mess up, doesn't create the right kind of virtuous behavior. Like, I think about it with my daughter. I'm like, hey, look, I want my daughter to want to get it right, because it's rewarding and encouraging to get it right. And there's grace and forgiveness and tolerance if you get it wrong. What I don't want for her to think in life is like, oh yeah, if you don't get things right, then there's something wrong with you fundamentally. You're flawed. You're ignorant. You're bad. So I think that the other thing with Mars, Pluto, and Saturn in the mix is you want to be careful that the pressure to get it right or to do the right thing is not creating a fear-based ideology. so many ideologies that are inherently good, supportive, helpful, whether it's religious, political, philosophical, when informed by the fear of, you know, getting it right. If you don't get it right, then you're flawed. They become totally perverted. Think, for example, my own background in the Christian church. I saw this happen often in the Christian church, though thankfully my own family was really not fear mongers. My dad was a preacher, he wasn't a fear monger at all. But there were people in the church that I grew up with who would make you feel like, look, if you don't get this right, you're going to hell. And as I grew older and learned to think a little bit more for myself and reading the scriptures and things like that, because I was a theology major in my undergrad, and then I went on to be a youth pastor at a Methodist church. And I was like, you know what? I just don't see Jesus saying that. I can't imagine if someone's trying to figure out how to be a virtuous person, how to enlighten themselves spiritually, how to be in tune with divinity, how to do that. What a process! What a difficult process. Um, you know, my sense is that grace and mercy are going to have a lot to do with that. How could they not, right? We're going to get it wrong. It's like yoga classes too. As a yoga teacher, you sit back and sometimes people have these they get these complexes about wanting to get the pose right, wanting to look really beautiful, wanting to, whatever. They want to, like it's an Olympic sport. And as a yoga teacher, you're sitting there going like, it's more about your mind in relationship to what you're doing. That's what yoga is really about. It's getting right within yourself in relation to the postures in the world that you're holding, on the mat that you're holding, and in the world. And that's the same thing that spiritual practice is all about. It's like, well, what is a yoga posture helping us do? Well, in the world, we have a lot of postures too. Today someone came over to look, we're putting our house up for sale, and someone said, we might got real estate agent sent a landscaping person over. He he uttered the phrase curb appeal, and I was like, oh my God, this is I have now I'm participating in this in this conversation about curb appeal. Anyway, so he was talking about mulching and some other stuff, and I was like, and I had to like occupy that position, which is uncomfortable for me because I just, whatever, I don't know, it's just it's not my it's not my cup of tea. But I had to occupy that position, and I had to try to do it in a way that was friendly and upbeat, even though, there's something about it that's not exactly me. That's a pressuring situation to be in. What to speak of the jobs we have, the relationships we hold, the family relationships we have. If in that space, the way that I've trained myself to be in that space is based on the fear of getting it wrong, or on the fear of hurting someone, or on the fear of being a bad person, um, I'm not going. It's going to be a stressful experience. My psychic joints are going to break down from the amount of pressure and stress I'm putting on myself in those life postures to get something right. You know, Whereas a, a, if I inhabit a lifestyle or a spiritual consciousness that says, look, you try to inhabit things to the best of your ability as a good, authentic, caring person who's trying to get it right, but also internally, that you're always good enough, you're always loved, that you're inherently, as a spiritual being, a child of God who's loved by the universe. And if you practice that and try to get things right from that space, it's a lot easier to marshal the will and the ego and force and assertiveness. And then when it's necessary, when you have to step into a posture that requires will or martial strength of any kind, it's not going to blow up because you haven't been trying to sculpt or harness that posture out of fear, and out of the fear of like getting it wrong. I think that exists in any ideology, whether you're on this side of the political spectrum or that side, whether you're one religion or another, that there's a way we have of thinking to ourselves that I have to inhabit whatever paradigm I'm living in, with a degree of flawlessness, strength, and confidence rooted on the fear of what it means if I get it wrong. And what a painful place that is to live in. And that's why when Mars gets in between Saturn and Pluto, the joints will break, man. You know, the explosions will occur, and the force trying to constrain and hold ourselves with the fear of, you know, social, religious, metaphysical damnation beneath us. You know, if that's what we're doing, like that's going to blow eventually, because you can't hold this fear in that kind of space, because it's such an intense energy. It's going to break out. um, and when it does break out, the thing that's been trying to hold it is going to be the one that's broken in the process. So, and that's a metaphor really for how we see explosions happening in the world too, all collectively. So I think this is the message that I really see as the message of the moment, is just, yeah, there might be a pressure to harness that martial energy right now, and it's very volatile and explosive. There's a lot of pressure to do things, get things right, you know, to execute. But just remember that even the toughest yoga postures, it's like there's a reason that in yoga philosophy, the universe is described as God's Leela, and the word means play. I'm not trying to suggest that we pretend, just, put on our unicorn hats and dance around like nothing's real or nothing's serious. But, you know, to me, self-confidence in being able to like meet the demands and pressures of a moment and show up and use assertiveness in the right way is really rooted on this paradoxical ability to not take myself too seriously, and of really underlying to see things as a play that I'm a part of, the play of life, the stage play, you could think of it as. Otherwise, the pressure is just too great. And you know what? I'm just not interested. I'm just not interested in there being that much at stake. My spiritual practice, from the yogic scriptures to the teachings of Jesus to even my ayahuasca experiences, they've all taught me one thing. It's like you're eternal. You're an eternal being without beginning or end. The universe is eternal. And in the big picture, there is nothing at stake. You're safe, you're loved, and you are perfect just as you are. It's like cosmic Mr. Rogers. You know what I mean? And if we can just remember that every day, just a little bit, if we have some practices in our life that help us remember that every day, I find that these very difficult moments, it's just easier to inhabit them, because it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll mess up, maybe I'll blow up, maybe someone will blow up at me, maybe something difficult will happen, maybe the dam will break in some area and the energy will come through and it'll be really strong and overwhelming. That could happen. But yeah, I feel okay. I'm going to be okay for this, because even if, for God forbid, that I were to lose my life, I trust that my life is not rooted alone in my body. Just those simple things can just take the pressure off. When eternity is the reality and not a goal, boy, it just takes the pressure off. Anyway, I know that it's hard to live like that every day. It's easy to sit here and preach about it with a lot of charisma in front of a wonderful group of people, but something else to put it into practice, obviously. So anyway, all right, so that's what I've got, and just some, watch as Mars perfects its square to Saturn. Let's make sure we know when that's happening. So if you feel this Mars-Pluto energy now, you have a sense. Remember not to get too lost in it. All right, so the perfection to Saturn from Mars, which I mentioned earlier briefly, but just so you know, this happens by about August 24th into the 25th. And between now and then, Pluto is separating, or Mars, excuse me, is separating from Pluto. And then, like I said, then after it separates from Saturn, it sits down, retrogrades, and we go back through all of it again. All right, I'm going to take a look and see if you guys have any questions. If there are any in here, I'm happy to answer whatever you've got. I just don't answer really specific questions about charts because I need to see a whole chart and spend time with it. Let's see. Hello, everyone. Nice to see all of you, and thank you for all the hellos. For those who struggle with Mars anger issues and face potential triggers during the upcoming transits, what are some good ways to dispel too much Mars? Great question. I'm going to tell you about a book that I really like, first of all, because for me, there's nothing like hearing some words of wisdom from people who are very wise and have actually walked the course. There's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Anger: Wisdom for Cooling the Flames. And that's probably one of my, I think it is. There's another book by the Dalai Lama on anger that I've really enjoyed too. At different times in my life, that's something that I've struggled with, probably like everyone else. I think parenting has been the most challenging place for me to explore anger and frustration and irritation and what triggers me. And um, it's really tempting to get into power struggles with your kids. And and I fail pretty regularly at it actually. But learning about that, for me, it's like, where are the areas in your life where there is, um, do the triggers exist? Kind of identifying where those triggers exist, and first and foremost, recognizing that we're human, and we have to understand that irritation is normal, and be easy on ourselves. I know ideally we'd all like to be like the kindest person in the universe, but we are people who are learning to control our minds. We are often consciously or subconsciously jockeying for power and dominance over one another. We have been hurt by power and dominance. We measure our worth by power and dominance. I'm not saying it's a good thing to do so, but so to notice that that's a lot to contend with. It's kind of a minefield walking around in this world. And in the United States especially, I think we have a lot of the right sayings and a lot of the right ideas, but oftentimes the actual embodiment of those values is another matter. And I think this is why the culture of cynicism and sarcasm and self-effacing humor has become so appealing to us, because what the truth is that underneath the surface of acting like we have it all together and we're like these perfectly awesome, nice human beings is often, a real shit show, as my grandfather used to say. So I think that's probably part of it. So just I think I would just, my advice for you, as I've gotten from my own teachers and stuff, is to just realize what a challenging world it is to live in, and embody these like hyper saintly, virtuous qualities that we put so much pressure on ourselves. I think it's more important to be in I've said this before too, to be in the humiliating, embarrassing, small, quiet, and painful details of our failures, and to just sit with them, without judgment and without this kind of type A, let me go fix it mentality. Because if we don't bear witness to our own suffering, to our own problems and our own frustrations and anger, um, we're trying to often use the same energy that's at the root of the problem to address the problem, which only will frustrate us and increase our anger. I think one of the things that was told to me about dealing with anger that I've resonated with the most is that anger often comes from being overwhelmed by a situation. So be careful not to put yourself in situations where you might get really overwhelmed and feel run down and burnt out, because you need a certain amount of energy to be able to contain and control emotions and uh, like that. So situations that your endurance is being taxed, be really careful about putting yourself into that position. The other thing that I would say is, if you have some kind of mindfulness practice, like meditation or prayer, journaling, chanting, whatever, you guys hear me say this all the time, but like a daily practice, you need to have a space within which to um, be able to get to know your triggers, your responses, your patterns, and to simply observe them and work on being able to respond constructively to them, so that your mind is becoming a servant rather than a false master. Because your higher self, the mind is not who you are. The mind is um, can be a friend or an enemy, as the Bhagavad Gita says. So if we can't make our minds into friends unless we do a little work with the mind. So that's why I think you need a spiritual practice every day. The other thing that was told to me that has been really helpful is that oftentimes anger is immediately cooled, like the flames of anger are immediately cooled by turning our attention away from ourselves and thinking, when I'm angry, there's count to 10. You've probably heard that before, but like there's also turn to serve rather than count to 10, which is gain control, right? And that's a good program too. Maybe meditation is helping us with gaining a little bit more self-control as well. But there's also just that, think of someone else. Like when you're really frustrated, when you're really angry, how can I do something compassionate or sensitive or thoughtful for someone else? Like, I know this is going to sound super cheesy, and I certainly don't do this all the time. I'm not any saint here, but like sometimes I think my wife and I have established, both of us, that if we're upset with one another, it really helps if we're both upset, for one of the two of us to step across the line drawn in the sand and do something to serve the other person. Not do something to solve the disagreement, but do something to serve. Like one thing that just slays me, every single time is, if I'm upset with my wife and she's like, "Come here, sit down, let me give you a back rub." It just rubs my shoulders. Immediately I'm like, "Yeah, I love you." You know what I mean? You just kind of, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Something about serving someone else that instantly, you know, it just calms things. And I know that, like, if I can think for 2 seconds about how to change my frustration into how to serve someone, how to give, how to care, how to be devoted to someone or something outside of myself, especially God for me personally. Like, how can I serve my altar, or how can I do a little praying or chanting, talking to God in my journal? If I direct my attention and love and toward divinity, and take the attention off from my anger, my frustration, I find that my will comes back into alignment, and I feel proud of myself afterward. In a not in a subdued way. I feel internal strength. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. Let's see. Okay. Why do you start with Libra instead of Gemini in your air sign horoscopes? Because Libra is the cardinal sign. So I always go cardinal, fixed, mutable in order of the signs. Libra is cardinal, then Aquarius is fixed, then Gemini is mutable. So that's why I do it in that order. Let's see. Thank you all. So many nice comments. Thank you all. Wondering about this transit Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter happening over someone's Mars as chart ruler. Well, you're getting everything we've talked about today. You could say you're getting really concentrated life events and life lessons around these themes, among others, probably. Would surgery not be recommended during this sort of aspect? It's a valve replacement for my 32-year-old sister. She showed no signs of having any problems till last week. Well, it sounds pretty acute, and it's not that I really. encourage people not to think about there being like good times and bad times for different things. There's a season and a time for everything, and it's more to me, you know, Mars Pluto, a sudden crisis, emergency, intervention, surgery. Seems pretty timely to me. Doesn't seem like it's off. It seems like it's right on time. It's scary, but I think we have to just. So much of life just is based on faith. You can't. You get up and you have faith that your car is going to turn on, or that so there's so many simple, invisible acts of trust or faith that we have every day. And astrology is when it starts to be used as a way of trying to dart around, you know, malefic, zigzagging energies that are here to mess you up. I just don't think it's a mind state that's going to help you relate to the planets in the best way. That being said, I have nothing against people wanting to be mindful about how they time things. But I would just say, if you have a surgery that's coming up right now, suddenly and very acutely, well, it seems like it's right on time for Mars Pluto. So just, it's scary, but just trust the process and let's pray for good outcome. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. I don't know where you guys get all these emojis. Those are some cool emojis. I'm not good at emojis. All right, let's see. Come on, admit it. You're all about an accent door that matches the mailbox. That's hilarious. Let's see. Okay, I'm going down. Catholic, punishment was a recurrent idea and the fear to be evil too. I wonder about the punishment pattern. Is it a twisted Saturnian scheme translated by certain religions? I mean, look, I think, I don't know, my gym teacher made me feel like I was going to go to hell sometimes, like gym hell, or like, I don't know, like I feel like I've had coaches that have been like that. I think it's just archetypal. Some people are going to take something, any form of discipline, anything that needs to be a habit or any relationship to authority that can become punitive. The authority can be abused. I was just reflecting on, like, the cool thing about the United States in some ways is that we are resistant to authority. That's like this whole history of us being resistant to authority, and in some ways that revolutionary spirit has been good, you could argue. But when it comes to following simple instructions to prevent prevent other people from dying, sometimes we're going to be like, no, it's me, I'm free, like that. So sometimes it's like the we have resistance to authority, we have built-in suspicion to authority, we have a desire to challenge authority. Some of that's good, and some of it comes from wanting to be the authority, not wanting to be dominated, but wanting to be dominant. So we just have to really check ourselves and make sure. Everyone's different, so I'm not trying to tell anyone what to think or feel. I'm just saying, you know, you have to be really careful with Saturn, Mars, Pluto, that what you're reacting to. It's very easy to sort of point the finger at someone and go, oh yeah, they're the problem, and look at how bad they are, look at how corrupt they are, right? But some of that is also there's envy, there's jealousy, there's greed, there's covetousness, there's competition, and there's desire to dominate people by seeing people go down. I don't know many, like the people that I really admire, I guess, mystics and different spiritual teachers, are not keen on revenge, or even when there is need for some kind of justice, that there's not this sense of like, yeah, I get really empowered and I get off on bad guys going down. You know what I mean? And I think we have to be really careful about that with Saturn, Mars, Pluto. Anyway, that's just another, I don't know what that was, just a tangent. All right, well, that's what I've got for you guys today. I know there's a bunch more questions, but I have someone coming here to the house to help me with something, and I think they're in my driveway right now, so I gotta go. I hope you're all doing. Do I practice fasting during Ekadashi? Yeah, yeah, definitely. Got the Ekadashi fast going. Not perfectly, but yeah, we practice Ekadashi in our house. And it's tricky sometimes to time your Ekadashi fasting with the exact moment of eating again. Like that part's actually hard for me when you get down to when is the right moment to uh, break your fast. Because often I'm working or I have a session or something like that. Can you suggest a simple way to understand activation and time lords? Yeah, take my class. I'm just playing. Anyway, on that note, my new classes are coming up in November. My new class starts in November, so check it out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. And yeah, I'll probably have another video tomorrow I'll be doing. If you have anything you ever want me to do a video on, feel free to email me info@nightlightastrology.com. And be good to yourself, be good to others out there. I hope you guys have a fantastic Thursday. Okay, bye everyone.